My name is Frank Miller. I am 67 years old and I spend my days restoring antique clocks because I like things that make sense and run on time. My hand was shaking so bad I nearly knocked my coffee mug onto the keyboard. The blue light of the monitor stung my tired eyes, but I couldn't look away. There it was. Item number 48,291. A silver star medal, a purple heart. A set of dog tags with the name Miller stamped into the dull steel. The starting bid was $50. The description said estate sale find vintage military items. I looked at the timestamp on the listing. It had been posted 2 hours ago. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break out of a cage. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:00 p.m. Just 6 hours ago, I had placed those exact medals into the soft, warm hands of my 17-year-old granddaughter, Kayla. She had hugged me. She had told me she loved me. She said she needed them for a history project to honor our family's legacy. Now they were being sold to the highest bidder by a user named CashKing44. Before I tell you what I did next, please like and subscribe to follow this story. I sat there in the dark. The silence of the house usually comforted me. Tonight it felt heavy. It felt like the air before a mortar strike. I clicked on the photo in the listing. I zoomed in. I needed to be sure. Maybe it was a coincidence. There are a lot of Millers in the army. I squinted at the screen. In the background of the photo, behind the medals, was a distinct pattern. It was a wood grain, a scratched oak wood grain. I knew that pattern. It was the picnic table at the park down by the high school. I had carved my initials into that table 40 years ago. She didn't even take them home. She walked straight from my house to the park, took the pictures, and listed them. My stomach turned over. I felt sick, not the kind of sick you get from bad food. The kind of sick you get when the world tilts sideways and you realize you aren't standing on solid ground. Kayla was my angel, my son, her father. He had his demons. He drifted in and out of jobs, in and out of trouble. But Kayla, she was the straight-A student, the one who came over on Sundays to help me weed the garden. The one who listened to my stories about the desert when no one else cared. I remembered her face from this afternoon. She had stood in my living room, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She looked nervous. I thought she was just anxious about school. "Grandpa," she had said, looking at the floor. "Mr. Henderson gave us a huge assignment. We have to bring in primary sources, artifacts. I told him about your service." I had beamed with pride. I puffed my chest out a little. "Is that so?" "Yeah, I was hoping. Could I borrow your shadow box? Just for tomorrow. I promise I'll bring it back right after school." I didn't hesitate. I went to the hallway. I took the shadow box down from the wall. The velvet was faded, but the metals still shined. I wiped a speck of dust off the glass. I handed it to her like I was handing over the crown jewels. "You be careful with that, KK," I said. "That's not just metal, that's blood." "I know, Grandpa," she whispered. She hugged me tight. "I'll protect it." I looked back at the computer screen, CashKing44. I clicked on the seller's profile. They had 0 feedback. Brand new account created today. I had 2 choices. I could call her parents. I could call my son and tell him his daughter was a thief. But I knew how that would go, yelling, screaming. Kayla would deny it. She would say she lost them. She would say I was a crazy old man who forgot where he put things. My son would take her side because it was easier than facing the truth. No, I had to handle this. I had to get the medals back first. Then I would get the truth. I looked at the listing again. There was a buy it now option, $500. That was my grocery money for the month. I live on a fixed income. $500 was a hit, but those medals were my life. I clicked the button. My fingers felt stiff. I typed in my credit card number. I confirmed the purchase. "Congratulations, you have won this item." A message popped up from the seller immediately. "Can meet tonight if you have cash. Local pickup only. Need money fast." My blood ran cold. She was awake. She was watching the listing. And she wanted to meet. I typed back, "I can meet." Where? The response came in seconds. "The 7-Eleven on 4th and Main, midnight. Bring cash. I'll refund the card if you bring cash." 4th and Main, that wasn't a good part of town. That was where the streetlights were always broken and the cops patrolled in pairs. What was Kayla doing there at midnight? I stood up. My knees popped. I walked to the hall closet. I put on my coat. I reached up to the top shelf and felt for the lockbox. I spun the dial. Click. I opened it. Inside lay my old service pistol, a 1911. I hadn't fired it in years. I stared at it. I wasn't going to shoot my granddaughter. But if she was meeting strangers at midnight in that neighborhood, she wasn't alone, or she was in trouble deep enough to drown in. I took the gun. I checked the magazine. It was empty. I left it empty. I put the gun in my waistband at the small of my back. It was a weight I hadn't carried in a long time, but it felt familiar. It felt necessary. I went to the garage. My old Ford truck started with a rumble that shook the tools on the walls. I backed out into the cool night air. The streets were empty. The suburbs were asleep. Everyone else was safe in their beds. They didn't know that just a few miles away, a piece of history was being sold for quick cash. I drove slow. I needed to think. Why? That was the question that kept spinning in my head. Why would she do it? Drugs, that was the first thought. It's always the first thought these days. But Kayla didn't look like a user. She was bright-eyed. She played varsity soccer, maybe a boy. A boy can make a smart girl do stupid things. I turned onto Main Street. The houses got smaller. The lawns got dirtier. The streetlights flickered. I saw the 7-Eleven up ahead. The fluorescent lights buzzed, spilling a sickly yellow glow onto the pavement. I pulled into the parking lot. I parked in the shadows away from the front door. I killed the engine. I sat there watching. A car was parked near the air pump. A beat-up Honda Civic with a mismatched door. The engine was running. I couldn't see inside. The tint was too dark. I checked my phone. 11:58 p.m. I waited. At midnight exactly, the driver's side door of the Honda opened. A figure stepped out. It wasn't Kayla. It was a guy, skinny, hoodie pulled up. He looked twitchy. He was looking around, scanning the lot. He held a plastic grocery bag in his hand. I felt a surge of confusion. Where was she? Had she given the medals to this guy to sell? Was he the boyfriend? I took a deep breath. I stepped out of the truck. I kept my hands visible away from my back. I walked toward him. My boots crunched on the gravel. He spun around. He looked like a scared rabbit. He couldn't have been more than 19. Acne scars on his cheeks, eyes darting everywhere. You the buyer? He asked. His voice cracked. I'm the buyer, I said. My voice was low, steady. The voice I used to use when I was a sergeant. You cash king. Yeah, he said. He held up the bag. You got the money. I got it, I said. I stopped 5 feet from him. Let me see the merchandise. He hesitated. He looked at the 7-Eleven clerk inside the store, then back at me. He opened the bag. I looked inside. The shadow box was gone. The medals had been ripped out. They were just loose in the bottom of a dirty plastic bag. My silver star tumbled in there like loose change. Rage flared in my chest, hot and sharp. Where's the box? I asked. Too big, he muttered. Trash can, you want 'em or not? I want them, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the wad of bills I kept for emergencies. I held it out. He reached for it. Wait, I said. I didn't let go of the cash. Where did you get these? He pulled back. None of your business, old man. Estate sale, like the ad said. Don't lie to me. I stepped closer. I saw his eyes widen. He saw something in my face. He saw that I wasn't just some collector. I know who these belong to. I know the girl who took them. He froze. I don't know no girls. Kayla, I said, where is she? What? He licked his lips. He looked toward the Honda. I followed his gaze. The passenger window of the Honda rolled down just an inch, then it rolled back up quickly. She's in the car, I said. It wasn't a question. Look, man, just take the medal and go, the kid said. He was sweating now, even though it was cold. We just need the cash. We gotta go. I stepped around him. Hey, he shouted. He tried to grab my arm. I moved on instinct, muscle memory from a lifetime ago. I swatted his hand away and shoved him back. He stumbled over his own feet and fell onto the asphalt. I walked to the Honda. I grabbed the passenger door handle. It was locked. I pounded on the glass. Kayla, opened the door. The figure inside slumped down, trying to hide. I looked back at the kid. He was scrambling up, reaching into his pocket. Don't, I barked. I put my hand behind my back, gripping the cold steel of the 1911. I didn't draw it. I just let him see the motion. He froze. His hands went up. Whoa, chill. It's just a knife, man. Chill. Unlock the car, I told him. He fumbled with a key fob. Beep. The locks clicked. I ripped the door open. Kayla was curled up in the passenger seat. She was wearing a hoodie that was too big for her. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked at me with pure terror. Grandpa, she squeaked. Get out of the car, Kayla, I said. I can't, she sobbed. I can't go with you. Get out. He'll kill me, she whispered. She wasn't looking at the kid on the ground. She was looking at the kid's phone, which was mounted on the dashboard. I looked at the phone. It was on a navigation app. The destination was set to a place 3 hours away, a city across the state line. Who will kill you? I asked. The kid on the ground spoke up. Big T, man, you don't understand. We owe him if we don't have the money by tomorrow morning. I looked at Kayla. Is this true? You stole my medals to pay a drug dealer. It's not for drugs, Kayla screamed. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. I yelled. I had never yelled at her before. She flinched. It's Dad, she whispered. The world stopped. The buzzing of the streetlights seemed to fade away. What did you say? Dad, she said, tears streaming down her face. He's in trouble, bad trouble. He borrowed money from some guys, he said. He said if I didn't help him get $2,000 by Friday, they were going to hurt Mom. They were going to burn the house down. I stood there on the pavement. The wind cut through my jacket. My son, my only son, he was using his teenage daughter to clean up his mess. He was making her steal from her grandfather to pay off his debts. I looked at the kid on the ground. Who are you? I'm Justin, he said. I'm her boyfriend, I was just trying to help her, I swear. We didn't know what else to do, she didn't want to steal from you, she cried the whole way here. I looked at the bag of medals in his hand. Give me the bag, I said. Justin handed it over. I felt the weight of the metal through the plastic. I didn't look inside. I put it in my coat pocket. Get in the truck, Kayla, I said. Grandpa, we can't, she pleaded, if we don't pay them. I said get in the truck. She hesitated, she looked at Justin. Go, Justin said, he's got it handled. Kayla climbed out of the Honda, she was shaking. She walked over to my truck and got in. I looked at Justin. Go home, son, stay away from these people. I can't, Justin said, they know my car. Then park it and walk, I said. Better to walk than to be carried in a box. I got into the truck. Kayla was huddled against the door as far away from me as possible. I started the engine. I didn't head toward my house. I didn't head toward her house. Where are we going? She asked, her voice trembling. We're going to see your father, I said. Grandpa, please, she begged. He's scared, he's desperate. He should be, I said. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He should be terrified. I drove fast. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about medals anymore. This wasn't about a school project. This was about a man who had broken the most sacred rule of all. You protect your children. You don't feed them to the wolves. We pulled up to my son's house 20 minutes later. The lights were on. I could see the blue flicker of a TV through the front window. I put the truck in park. Stay here. Grandpa, don't hurt him, Kayla said. I didn't answer. I got out. I walked up the driveway. I didn't knock. I used the key I had kept on my ring for 10 years. The key for emergencies. I opened the door. My son David was sitting on the couch. He had a beer in his hand. He was watching a football game. He looked up surprised. Dad, he said, his eyes were glassy. What are you doing here? It's late. Where's Mary? I asked. Mary was his wife, Kayla's mom. She's working the night shift. Why? He didn't look scared. He didn't look like a man whose family was in danger. He looked relaxed. He looked drunk. Where's Kayla? He asked. She's in my truck, I said. I walked over to the TV and turned it off. The silence in the room was sudden and sharp. Hey, I was watching that, David said, annoyed. She told me about the money, David, I said. David froze. His face went pale. He put the beer down on the coaster. What money? Well, it's the money you owe, the money you told her to get, the money you said you needed or they would hurt Mary. David laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Dad, come on, she's a kid. She exaggerates. I have a little debt. It's nothing. She stole my silver star, David, I said. My voice was quiet. She stole my medals to sell them to a pawn shop because she thought you were going to die. David rubbed his face with his hands. I didn't tell her to steal them. I just said I needed help. I didn't know she would do that. You put that weight on her, I said. You put your failures on a 17-year-old girl. It's just $2,000. David snapped. He stood up. He was bigger than me now, younger, but he was soft. I would have paid it back. I just needed a bridge loan. Who do you owe? I asked. It doesn't matter. It matters, I said, because I have the medals and you don't have the money, so who is coming for you? David looked at the floor. Nobody is coming, Dad. I made it up. The air left the room. What? I made it up, he mumbled. About them hurting Mary, about burning the house, I owe a bookie. He was gonna break my legs. I was scared. I knew if I told Kayla it was about Mom, she would find a way to help. She loves her mom. I stared at him, my own flesh and blood. He had terrorized his daughter. He had made her a criminal. He had made her believe her mother was going to die, all to save his own knees. I felt a sadness so deep it felt like drowning. You are a coward, I said. I know, David whispered, I know. Get your coat, I said. What? Get your coat, you're coming with me. Where? We are going to the police station. You are going to turn yourself in for extortion, or fraud, or whatever they call it when you abuse your child's mind like that. Dad, no, you can't. I can, I said, and I will, or I can leave right now and I can tell that bookie exactly where you are, and I won't lift a finger to stop him. David looked at me. He saw the look in my eyes. It was the same look I gave the enemy in the desert 30 years ago. It was the look of a man who had drawn a line in the sand. He stood up. He walked to the closet. He put on his coat. We walked out to the truck. Kayla saw her father coming. She rolled down the window. Dad. Oh, she cried. Did you fix it? David looked at his daughter. For the first time in his life, he looked ashamed. I'm sorry, baby, he said. I'm so sorry. I opened the back door of the truck. Get in. He got in. I drove to the police station. It was a silent ride. Kayla cried softly in the front seat. David stared out the window in the back. I parked in front of the precinct. Go inside, I told David. Tell them everything, tell them about the bookie, get into protection if you have to, but you stay away from this girl until you are a man. David nodded, he got out, he walked up the steps, he didn't look back, I watched him go inside, then I turned to Kayla. I'm sorry, Grandpa, she said, she was wiping her eyes. I was so scared. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the plastic bag, I took out the silver star, I held it up, it caught the light of the street lamp. You see this? I asked, she nodded. Men died for this, I said. Good men, it represents honor, sacrifice, truth. I put it in her hand. You keep it, I said, her eyes went wide. What, no I can't, I stole it. You stole it to save your family, I said. You did it for the wrong reason, but you had the right heart. You were brave, braver than your father. I don't deserve it, she whispered. Nobody deserves it, I said. That's the point, you earn it by living right, you keep this. And every time you look at it, you remember tonight. You remember that lies destroy and the truth is the only thing worth fighting for. She closed her hand around the metal. She leaned over and hugged me. I held her tight. She was shaking, but she was safe. Now, I said, putting the truck in gear, let's go get some pancakes, I'm starving. She laughed. It was a weak, watery laugh, but it was real. At 1:00 a.m. The best time for pancakes, I said. We drove away from the station. The night was dark, but the road ahead was clear. I knew there would be hard days ahead, dealing with Mary, dealing with David's mess. But as I looked at my granddaughter clutching that old piece of metal, I knew we would be okay. We were Millers, we survived. I just hoped the clock on the wall at the diner was running on time. I'd hate to have to fix it. The second hand on the plastic bezel swept past the 12, marching with a rigid mechanical jerk that irritated me more than the arthritis in my right knee. It was a cheap clock, the kind promotional companies send out for free, emblazoned with a faded logo for a soda brand that probably didn't exist anymore. It was 3 minutes fast compared to my wristwatch, a field piece I'd wound every morning since 1978. I trust my watch. I didn't trust this diner, I didn't trust the lukewarm sludge the waitress kept calling coffee, and I certainly didn't trust the man I was waiting for. I wrapped my fingers around the ceramic mug, letting the residual heat seep into my calluses. My hands are rough things, maps of a life spent working with steel and soil, scarred by shrapnel and screwdrivers alike. They possess a kind of ugly utility that my granddaughter used to trace with her soft, small fingers when she was a toddler. She'd ask about the white line running across my knuckles or the burn mark on my forearm, and I'd tell her fairy tales about dragons instead of the truth about engine blocks and mortar fire. Now those same hands felt empty, twitching with a phantom weight. They missed the velvet box. They missed the cold, heavy brass that validated the nightmares. The diner smelled of bleach fighting a losing war against bacon grease. It was a scent that stuck to the back of your throat, coating your tongue with an oily film. I took a sip of the coffee, grimacing as the acidity hit my stomach. I needed the caffeine, though. I hadn't slept. Not really. How could I? I'd spent the hours between midnight and dawn staring at the glow of my laptop screen, navigating a website that looked like a digital flea market for scavengers. Item 4409B Vintage Military Collection. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Campaign Ribbons, Seller, Lucky Pawn 88. The photo was blurry, taken with a shaky hand under poor lighting, but I knew the scratch on the back of that bronze star. I put it there in '82 when I dropped it while moving houses. I knew the way the ribbon on the Purple Heart was slightly frayed on the left edge. They were mine. And seeing them there, priced at $200 like a used lawnmower or a crate of old records, felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out a lung. The bell above the door jingled, a cheerful sound that clashed with the gloom of the interior. I didn't turn my head immediately. You don't give away your position until you've assessed the threat. I watched the reflection in the dark window glass beside me. A man walked in. He was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a hoodie that cost more than my truck and carrying a messenger bag slung across a skinny chest that had never known the strain of a rucksack. He looked around, nervous, eyes darting like minnows in a bucket. He wasn't a soldier. He was a tourist in a world of consequences. I shifted in the booth, the red vinyl groaning under my weight. I raised my hand just enough to catch his attention. He saw me, the gray beard, the flannel shirt, the stillness of a man who isn't waiting for a bus, and hesitated. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was wondering if I was the mark. I had created a burner account to message him, posing as an avid collector named History Buff. I told him I had cash. I told him I wouldn't ask questions. He walked over, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. He slid into the booth opposite me, keeping the bag on his lap. He smelled of stale cannabis and cheap body spray, a chemical musk that made my nose itch. "Mr. Buff?" he asked, his voice cracked. "Just sit," I said. My voice sounds like gravel crunching under tires these days. I don't try to soften it. "You have the items." He licked his lips. Yeah, I got 'em. You got the cash." "What?" I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I placed it on the table, keeping my hand flat over it. Let's see the merchandise, I don't buy blind. He looked at the envelope, then at me. He seemed reassured by the thickness of the paper stack. He unzipped the messenger bag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in a dirty t-shirt. My jaw tightened. He placed it on the sticky table and unfolded the cloth. There they were. Seeing them in person was worse than seeing them on the screen. On the screen they were pixels. Here, amidst the ketchup stains and the salt shakers, they were real. The metals were jumbled together, clinking softly. The ribbons were tangled. It was disrespectful. It was sacrilege. I felt a surge of heat rise up the back of my neck, a familiar combat rage that I hadn't felt in decades. It was the feeling of the safety clicking off. I reached out and picked up the Purple Heart. The metal was cold. I ran my thumb over George Washington's profile. Nice, right? The kid said, trying to sound like a salesman. Real vintage. Grandpa died, left him in a box. We don't really do the war stuff, you know. Figured someone else would appreciate the history. The lie was so casual, so easily delivered that I almost admired his audacity. Almost. Your grandpa, I repeated, not looking up. He earned these. Oh yeah, big hero, stormed the beaches and all that. Which beaches? He blinked. You know, Normandy, the Pacific, everywhere. What? I looked up then, locking eyes with him. I have eyes that have seen men die. They are pale blue and they don't blink much. I let him look into them and see the emptiness there. These are from Vietnam, I said quietly, and the Gulf. The kid shifted. Right, yeah, that's what I meant. He was a career guy. Look, do you want him or not? I got other buyers. I want them, I said, but I have a question regarding the acquisition. I told you, my grandpa. Stop, I said. It wasn't a shout, but it cut through the diner noise like a knife. I know who these belong to, and I know they didn't belong to your grandfather. The kid froze. His eyes went to the envelope under my hand, then to the door. Look, man, I don't want no trouble. If you ain't buying, I'm walking. What? He reached for the metals. My hand moved. It wasn't as fast as it used to be, but it was fast enough. I clamped my hand over his wrist, pinning it to the table. He yelped, a high-pitched sound that drew a glance from the waitress, but she looked away quickly. She knew better than to get involved in booth 4. You're hurting me, he hissed. I'm barely holding you, I said, leaning in. Now listen to me very carefully. These metals were stolen from my house yesterday by a family member. I want to know who brought them to you. The kid's face went pale. I bought 'em. I run a legit business. You run a fence operation out of a backpack, I corrected him. Who brought them to you? He struggled, but I tightened my grip, pressing his wrist bone into the hard edge of the table. Name or description? It was a girl, he squeaked. Just a girl, high schooler maybe, crying. She looked messed up, man. My heart hammered against my ribs. Crying, my granddaughter Emily. She was 17, honor roll, varsity soccer. She asked to borrow them for a history project. I had been so proud. I had taken them out of the safe, polished them, and put them in her hands. I told her to treat them with respect. And she had looked me in the eye, smiled that smile that used to melt my heart, and said, I promise, Grandpa. What did she look like? I demanded, loosening my grip slightly but not letting go. Dark hair, ponytail, had a scar maybe, or a bruise on her cheek. She was wearing a big hoodie, tried to hide it. The air left the room, a bruise. Emily didn't have a bruise on her cheek when she left my house yesterday morning. Did she say why she was selling them? She needed cash fast. She was shaking, man. Said she owed someone. Said if she didn't come up with 500, they were gonna hurt him. Hurt who? I dunno, her boyfriend maybe. She just said Mikey. Said Mikey was in deep. Mikey, I knew the name, Michael Vance. A dropout with a souped-up Honda and a reputation for dealing pills behind the bowling alley. I had told Emily to stay away from him. I had forbidden him from coming to the house. She had screamed at me, told me I was a controlling old fossil, told me I didn't understand love. I understood love. Love was taking a bullet for your brother. Love was working double shifts at the plant to pay for braces. Love was keeping your mouth shut about the things that haunted you so your family could sleep soundly. This wasn't love, this was leverage. I released the kid's wrist. He scrambled back, rubbing the red marks on his skin. Take the money, I said, sliding the envelope toward him. He looked confused. What? Take it, it's 200, that's what you listed them for. I thought you said they were yours. They are, I said, gathering the metals and wrapping them gently in the t-shirt, treating them with the reverence they deserved. But I'm paying you for the information, and for the inconvenience. I stood up, my knees popping. I towered over him. But if I ever see you selling metals again, anyone's metals, I won't be bringing an envelope. Do you understand? He nodded frantically, grabbing the cash and stuffing it into his pocket. He didn't wait for me to dismiss him. He grabbed his bag and bolted for the door, the bell jingling frantically in his wake. I stood there for a moment, the bundle of medals heavy in my hand. I looked at the clock on the wall again. It was still wrong. I dropped a $5 bill on the table for the coffee I didn't finish and walked out into the gray afternoon. The parking lot was gravel and potholes. My truck, a 2004 Ford that had seen better days but ran like a tank, was waiting. I climbed in and placed the medals on the passenger seat. I rested my hand on them for a second, closing my eyes. I could feel the ghosts in the metal, the heat of the jungle, the smell of burning oil, the screams, but right now those ghosts had to wait. I had a new mission. Emily was in trouble. She was scared. She was desperate enough to steal the only things of value I owned to save some punk who was dragging her down. I started the engine. It roared to life, a deep, throat-clearing rumble. I wasn't just a retired veteran anymore. I wasn't just an old man collecting a pension and yelling at the news. I was a grandfather, and someone had hurt my granddaughter. Someone had put fear into her. I put the truck in gear. I knew where the bowling alley was. I knew where the kids like Mikey hung out. I pulled out of the diner lot, the tires crunching on the gravel. I checked my rearview mirror, watching the diner shrink into the distance. The medals were back in my possession, but the honor wasn't restored yet, not until I found out who put that bruise on her face. The drive to the bowling alley took 20 minutes. It was on the edge of town, a place where the streetlights were broken and the sidewalks were cracked. It was a place for people who didn't want to be found, which made it exactly the kind of place I knew how to navigate. I parked in the back, near the dumpsters. I reached under my seat and pulled out the tire iron I kept there. I didn't plan to use it. I hoped I wouldn't have to, but I learned a long time ago that it's better to have a weapon and not need it than to need it and be holding nothing but your DCK. I walked around to the side of the building. There was a group of kids huddled near the fire exit, smoking cigarettes and looking tough. I scanned them. Baggy jeans, oversized hoodies, posturing, sheep in wolves' clothing. I didn't see Mikey. But I saw a kid I recognized from the yearbook photos Emily left on the counter, a lanky boy with dyed hair. I walked up to them. My boots were heavy on the pavement. They stopped talking as I approached. They sensed the shift in the atmosphere. They were used to teachers or cops, figures of authority they could mock or evade. They weren't used to an old man who walked with the center of gravity of a tank. "I'm looking for Michael Vance," I said. The lanky kid smirked. "Who's asking?" "His parole officer." The other kids laughed. It was a nervous sound. "I'm Emily's grandfather," I said. The smirk vanished. "Mikey ain't here," the kid said, looking at his shoes. "He took off." "Took off where?" "I dunno, man. He got some cash earlier, said he had to go pay off the supplier. He went to the rail yards." The rail yards, that was bad. That wasn't just kids playing gangster. That was where the real rot in this town lived. That was where the serious weight moved. If Mikey was there and he had dragged Emily into it, was Emily with him? I asked, my voice dropping an octave. The kid hesitated. He looked at the tire iron in my hand, hanging loosely by my side. "Yeah," he whispered. "She was driving." I didn't say another word. I turned and walked back to the truck. The rail yards were on the other side of the river. It was an industrial wasteland of rusted shipping containers and abandoned warehouses. It was a place where cell service died and the police didn't patrol unless they were in a squad of 4. I got back in the truck and threw the tire iron onto the floorboard. I needed something more than a piece of steel. I reached into the glove box and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 6 years. It rang 4 times. "Yeah," a voice answered. It sounded like sandpaper rubbing against concrete. "Jim," I said, "it's Sarge." There was a pause, a long silence where I could hear the background noise of a television on the other end. "I thought you were dead," Jim said. "Not yet," I said. "I need a favor. I need eyes on the rail yards, and I might need a cleanup crew." "What?" Jim laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "You always did know how to ruin a perfectly good retirement. What's the situation?" "Hostile extraction, civilian involved, family." "Give me 10 minutes," Jim said. "I'll bring the boys." I hung up. I looked at the medals on the seat beside me. The sunlight hit the bronze star, making it gleam. "Hold on, Emmy," I whispered to the empty cab. "Grandpa's coming." I slammed the truck into drive and peeled out of the lot, leaving a cloud of dust and diesel smoke in the air. The old engine roared, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded like a battle cry. The drive to the river was a blur of gray asphalt and red traffic lights that I treated as suggestions. My mind was running tactical simulations. If Mikey was meeting a supplier, it was a drug deal. If he owed money, he was the bottom rung. If he had Emily with him, she was collateral or a shield. The thought made my hands tight on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I crossed the bridge, the metal grid beneath the tires humming. The rail yards loomed ahead, a skeleton of industry against the darkening sky. Shadows stretched long and thin between the stacks of containers. It was a maze, a rat's nest. I slowed the truck, killing the headlights. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air rush in. I listened, the wind whistling through the metal, the distant bark of a dog, and then faintly the sound of shouting. I steered the truck down a gravel access road, the tires crunching softly. I saw a cluster of vehicles near an old weighing station, a Honda Civic with a spoiler that looked ridiculous, and a black SUV that looked expensive. I killed the engine and coasted to a stop behind a stack of rotting pallets. I grabbed the tire iron, I checked my pocket for my knife, a Kabar folder that was as sharp as a razor. I stepped out of the truck, moving low. My knees protested, sending spikes of pain up my thighs, but I pushed it down. Pain is just information. It tells you you're still alive. I crept toward the weighing station, using the shadows as cover. I could hear voices now, clearer. "You're short, Mikey," a man's voice said, smooth, dangerous. "500 is interest, you still owe the principal." I can get it, that was Mikey, whiny, pathetic. "I just need more time." "Time's up, kid, we discussed this." "Please look, take the car, take whatever." "I don't want your piece of junk car." Then I heard a sound that stopped my heart, a sob. "Let her go," Mikey said, but his voice was weak. "She didn't do anything." "She's here with you," the smooth voice said. "That makes her part of the transaction. Maybe she can work off your debt." Red, the world went red. I didn't wait for Jim. I didn't wait for backup. I moved. I rounded the corner of the weighing station. There were 3 men standing by the SUV. Mikey was on his knees in the dirt, blood dripping from his nose. Emily was being held by a massive man in a leather jacket, his arm wrapped around her neck. She was crying, her face streaked with tears, a dark bruise forming on her cheekbone. The man with the smooth voice was leaning against the SUV, checking his fingernails. He looked up as I stepped into the clearing. "Who the hell is this?" he asked, annoyed. "Grandpa Walton." I didn't stop walking. I gripped the tire iron in my right hand, letting it hang by my leg. "Let the girl go," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a man who has already made the decision to do violence. The big man holding Emily laughed. "Get lost, old man, before you break a hip." "Grandpa," Emily screamed. "Go away, they have guns." "I know, honey," I said, not taking my eyes off the leader. "Close your eyes." The leader pulled a pistol from his waistband, a Glock. Standard issue, he held it sideways like a thug in a movie. I said, "Back off, Pop." I was 20 feet away, too far to rush him. But then a distinct sound cut through the air. The crack thump of a high-velocity round hitting metal. The side mirror of the SUV exploded in a shower of plastic and glass. The leader flinched, ducking instinctively. From the top of a shipping container 50 yards away, a silhouette rose. "Drop it." Jim's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the yard. 2 more figures stepped out from behind the container stacks to my left and right. Old men. Men with gray hair and limps and potbellies. But men who held their hunting rifles and shotguns with the steady, practiced ease of professionals. The leader looked around, realizing his tactical error. He was surrounded. "You boys picked the wrong day," I said, closing the distance. The man holding Emily loosened his grip in surprise. That was his mistake. Emily, bless her, stomped on his instep with her sneaker and drove her elbow into his ribs. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it made him grunt and let go. She scrambled away, running toward me. The leader raised his gun again, aiming at her back. I didn't think. I threw the tire iron. It wasn't a perfect throw. I aimed for his head, but it hit his shoulder with a sickening crunch. He screamed and dropped the gun. I was on him a second later. I tackled him, the momentum carrying us both into the dirt. I smelled his cologne, his fear. I punched him. Once, twice. Solid, heavy blows that rattled my own bones but shattered his nose. "Stay down," I roared. The big man who had held Emily took a step toward us, but a shotgun blast into the dirt at his feet stopped him cold. "Don't be stupid, son," one of Jim's friends called out. "I haven't missed a buck in 40 years." Silence fell over the rail yards, heavy, breathing silence. I stood up, breathing hard, my chest heaving. I wiped blood from my knuckles onto my jeans. I looked at the leader who was groaning in the dust, clutching his shoulder. "You ever come near my family again," I said, leaning down so he could hear the death in my whisper, "and they won't find enough of you to bury." I turned around. Emily was standing there, shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. Mikey was still on his knees, staring at me with his mouth open. I walked over to Emily. She flinched as I reached out, and that broke my heart more than the theft. "It's me," I said softly. "It's just Grandpa." She looked at me, really looked at me, seeing the blood on my hands, the rage fading from my eyes, the old man who told her stories about dragons. "Grandpa," she sobbed and threw herself into my chest. I held her. I held her tight, smelling her shampoo and the metallic scent of the rail yard. I felt her shaking. "I'm sorry," she cried into my flannel shirt. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I was so scared." I know, I said, stroking her hair. I know it's okay, I got you. I looked over her shoulder at Mikey. He tried to stand up. Stay on your knees, I barked. He froze. You, I said, pointing a trembling finger at him, you used her. You hid behind her. Lie, sir, I. You're going to wait here, I said. The police are coming. My friends called them 5 minutes ago. You're going to tell them everything about these men. You're going to testify. And if you leave out a single detail, if you try to protect anyone, I'll know. I looked up at the shipping container. Jim gave me a thumbs up and vanished into the shadows, his crew melting away with him. They wouldn't be there when the cops arrived. We were ghosts. We solved problems and we disappeared. That was the deal. I guided Emily toward the truck. Come on, I said, let's go home. What about the medals? She asked, her voice small. Did you get them back? They're in the truck, I said. She stopped walking. She pulled back and looked at me, tears streaming down her bruised face. I stole your honor, Grandpa, I stole it. I reached out and cupped her face in my rough hands, avoiding the bruise. No, Emmy, I said firmly. Those medals, they're just brass and ribbon, they're just metal, you didn't steal my honor. I looked back at the thugs writhing in the dirt, then at the terrified boy who would spend the next few years thinking about his choices. Then I looked at my granddaughter safe, alive. My honor is protecting this family, I said, and I think I just polished it up a bit. We got in the truck. I started the engine. As we drove back across the bridge, leaving the darkness of the rail yards behind, I reached over and opened the glove box. I handed her a napkin for her face. She took it, wiping her eyes, then she looked down at the seat between us. She picked up the bundle of medals, she unwrapped the t-shirt slowly, she held the purple heart in her palm. Can I clean them for you? She asked. When we get home, I want to do it right this time. I looked at the road ahead, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. The clock on the dash was still wrong, but I didn't care. Yeah, I said, my voice thick. Yeah, Emmy, you can clean them. The war was over, but the watch continued. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was standing guard alone. The silence in the kitchen wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind anymore, the type that hangs in the air after a door slams or a harsh word is spoken. It was a settled silence, like dust motes drifting in a sunbeam after a long afternoon. I sat there at the small, scarred oak table, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. Across from me, Julie was asleep with her head on her arms, her breathing a soft, rhythmic huff that reminded me of when she was a toddler. The velvet box sat between us. It was closed now, the latches clicked shut with a finality that felt good, solid. I reached out, my knuckles swollen with arthritis and rough with decades of work, and just rested my fingertips on the lid of that box. For years, those medals had been a weight. They were cold metal ghosts in a drawer I rarely opened, reminders of friends who didn't come back and a version of myself I didn't recognize in the mirror anymore. But tonight, after the panic of seeing them on that auction site, after the breathless drive, the confrontation, and the tearful confession, they felt different. They weren't just mine anymore. They were the anchor that had almost dragged us under, but instead they had pulled us back together. Julie shifted in her sleep, her hair falling over her face. I watched her, really looked at her for the first time in months. I'd been so busy being angry, so busy feeling betrayed by the world and my own family, that I'd missed the fact that she was drowning too. She hadn't taken them out of malice. She'd taken them out of desperation, a foolish, panicked need for money to fix a mistake she was too scared to bring to me. That hurt, knowing she feared my judgment more than she trusted my help, but we had cleared the air. The air was scrubbed clean. I stood up slowly, my knees popping, a familiar percussion section that accompanied my every move these days, and moved to the window. The streetlights outside hummed, casting long, orange shadows across the wet pavement. It had rained earlier, a hard, driving rain that washed the grime off the siding, and now the world looked slick and new. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. A 67-year-old man looked back, gray stubble on his jaw, eyes tired but clear. I wasn't the sergeant anymore. I wasn't just the grandfather who paid the bills and grumbled about the thermostat. I was the guy who had to figure out what came next. The school project she had used as a cover story turned out to be partially true in a twisted sort of way. There was a history presentation due. She had just panicked about the other trouble she was in and let the lie spiral. But now, with the medals back and the debt settled, the presentation was actually looming. I walked over and gently shook her shoulder. Julie, hey kiddo, wake up. She stirred, blinking groggily, a red mark on her cheek from the sleeve of her sweater. She looked at me with a sudden flash of fear before memory kicked in and she softened. Grandpa, is it late? It's late enough, I said, my voice gravelly but gentle. Go to bed, we'll tackle the rest in the morning. She looked at the box on the table. I still have to do the report. It's due Friday. I don't have anything prepared. I pulled out the chair next to her and sat back down, the wood groaning under my weight. You have the primary source right here, I said, tapping my chest. You want to know about the medals. You want to know what they cost, not in dollars but in the stuff that matters. Her eyes widened. I had never spoken about the war, not to her mother, not to her. It was the forbidden zone, the locked room in the house of my mind. You'd do that? She asked, her voice small. If you're going to present them, you better get the story straight, I said. Go get a notebook. I'm not repeating myself. What? She scrambled up, the fatigue vanishing, replaced by a frantic energy. She returned a minute later with a spiral-bound notebook and a pen, clicking it nervously. For the next 2 hours, the kitchen became a command post of history. I didn't tell her the blood and guts parts, not the stuff that wakes me up sweating at 3:00 a.m. She didn't need that. Nobody needs that unless they were there. But I told her about the mud. I told her about the smell of diesel and rain in a jungle that never seemed to dry out. I told her about Henderson, who could play the harmonica like a virtuoso, and about the time we spent 3 days trying to get a stray dog out of a minefield. I opened the box. I picked up the bronze star. It felt heavy in my palm, heavier than a piece of metal has any right to be. This isn't for being a hero, I told her, watching her pen fly across the paper. This is for doing a job when your brain is screaming at you to run the other way. It's for keeping your head when the world is exploding. She stopped writing and looked at me. Were you scared? I looked at the ribbon, faded slightly with age. Terrified, I admitted. It was the first time I'd said that out loud in 40 years. Every single minute, being brave isn't about not being scared, Julie. It's about being scared to death and saddling up anyway. We talked until the coffee pot was empty and the streetlights outside flickered off, signaling the coming dawn. When she finally went up to bed, clutching her notebook like it was a treasure map, I stayed downstairs for a bit. I felt lighter. Hollowed out maybe, but clean, like a wound had been debrided and finally stitched up properly. The next few days were a blur of activity. The dynamic in the house had shifted. Julie wasn't skirting around me, avoiding eye contact. She was engaging, asking questions, showing me drafts of her speech. And I wasn't hiding in the garage tinkering with the lawnmower to avoid conversation. We were a unit, a fire team of 2. Friday came with a gray, overcast sky that threatened rain but held off. I put on my suit, the navy blue one I usually saved for funerals and weddings, though lately it had seen more of the former than the latter. It was a little tight in the shoulders and loose in the waist, but it was clean. I spent 20 minutes polishing my shoes until I could see the reflection of the ceiling fan in the black leather. Attention to detail, discipline, some things you never lose. I drove us to the school. The old truck rattled and hummed, a familiar vibration that usually soothed me, but today my stomach was doing slow rolls. I hadn't been in a school in years. The last time was probably for a parent-teacher conference for Julie's mom decades ago. The high school was a sprawling brick building that looked more like a minimum security prison than a place of learning. The hallways were a riot of noise, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on linoleum, the cacophony of 300 teenagers shouting over one another. It smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap body spray. I kept a hand on Julie's shoulder, partly to guide her but maybe a little to steady myself. You nervous? I asked as we navigated the tide of students toward the auditorium. A little, she admitted, clutching the velvet box to her chest. Are you? I've faced machine gun fire, kid. A room full of teenagers doesn't scare me. That was a lie. This was terrifying. Judgment from peers is a brutal thing, and I didn't want her to fail. I didn't want my past to be a boring footnote in her grade. We entered the auditorium. It was cavernous, with rows of fold-down velvet seats that had seen better days. I found a spot near the back, instinct driving me to keep a wall behind me and a clear view of the exits. The lights dimmed and the low roar of the student body settled into a distracted hum. There were other presentations. A boy mumbled through a slideshow about the Industrial Revolution. A girl read a poem about the Civil War that was surprisingly moving. I sat stiffly, my hands resting on my knees, waiting. When Julie's name was called, my heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. She walked onto the stage, looking small under the harsh stage lights. She adjusted the microphone, a high-pitched squeal of feedback making the audience wince. She took a breath and I saw her posture change. She straightened her spine, she lifted her chin. It was a subtle shift, but I recognized it. It was the brace for impact stance. My grandfather served in the war, she began. Her voice wavered for a second, then firmed up. He doesn't talk about it much, most veterans don't. But this week, he told me that history isn't just dates in a book, it's people. She opened the box. She didn't hold it up like a trophy. She set it on the podium and angled it so the light caught the medal. These medals, she said, gesturing to them, I used to think they were just cool objects, things that made my grandpa a hero, but I learned that they aren't trophies, they're receipts. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd at the word, but she pressed on, serious. They are the cost of doing what had to be done. The Bronze Star isn't for being fearless. It's for being terrified and moving forward anyway. She looked out into the darkness, scanning the crowd until she found me in the back. I nodded, a sharp single dip of my chin. My grandfather told me that bravery is a decision you make when you have no other choice, she continued. And sometimes the hardest battles aren't in the jungle. Sometimes they're in your own kitchen, trying to forgive or trying to tell the truth when a lie would be easier. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and aching. She was talking about the medals, but she was talking about us. She was weaving the story of the war with the story of her mistake and our reconciliation without ever explicitly airing our dirty laundry. It was masterful. It was honest. These medals represent the past, she concluded, closing the box with a soft snap that the microphone amplified through the room. But the person who earned them, he's my future. He's the reason I know that you can make mistakes and still come back from them. He's my guard. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was high school after all, and half the kids were on their phones, but it was solid, it was respectable. The teacher, a woman with glasses on a chain and a tired expression, looked genuinely impressed. She nodded at Julie as she left the stage. When Julie came back down the aisle, her face was flushed, her eyes bright. She slid into the seat next to me and let out a long, shaky exhale. "How did I do?" she whispered. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, soldier. You did real good." We sat through the rest of the assembly, but I didn't hear a word of it. I was thinking about the concept of legacy. For a long time, I thought my legacy was just genetic, passing down the family name, keeping the house standing. Or maybe I thought it was those medals, proof that I had existed and done something of consequence. But sitting there in the dark, smelling the dust of the theater curtains, I realized the medals were just metal. If I had lost them, if they had been sold on that website, it would have been a tragedy, yes, but it wouldn't have erased what I did. My legacy wasn't in the box. It was sitting next to me, wearing a denim jacket and checking her phone. My legacy was the fact that she understood duty and forgiveness. When the assembly ended, we shuffled out into the bright afternoon light. The clouds had broken and the sun was glaring off the hoods of the cars in the parking lot. "You hungry?" I asked as we reached the truck. "Starving," she said. "Can we get burgers?" "A greasy spoon." "The greasiest," she grinned. We climbed into the truck. I tossed my jacket in the back and rolled up my sleeves. The air was warm. As I turned the key and the engine roared to life, I looked at the velvet box sitting on the dashboard where Julie had placed it. "You know," I said, shifting into reverse. "You can keep those in your room for a while if you want." She looked at me surprised. "Really? I thought you'd want to lock them up in the safe." "They're safe enough," I said, backing out of the spot. "Besides, they're no good to anyone locked away in the dark. Better they see a little light. Just don't list them on eBay again, all right?" She laughed, a genuine bell-clear sound that cut through the rumble of the engine. "Deal." We drove toward the diner, the windows down, the wind rushing in. I rested my arm on the door frame, feeling the sun on my skin. The war was over, the medals were home. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence in my head was gone, replaced by the chatter of my granddaughter telling me about her math test and the radio playing an old song I hadn't heard in years. I wasn't standing guard anymore. I was just driving, and that was enough. The diner, Sal's Stop, was one of those places that time forgot. Chrome counters, red vinyl booths patched with duct tape, and the smell of onions and frying hamburger grease that permeated your clothes the second you walked in. It was perfect. We slid into a booth by the window. A waitress named Brenda, who had been working there since I was a young man with a full head of dark hair, shuffled over with a pot of coffee. "Well, look who it is," she rasped, flipping a mug over. "And the little one, although you ain't so little anymore." "Hi, Brenda," Julie said. "Coffee for the grump, soda for the girl." Brenda asked, already pouring. "You know it," I said. As we ate burgers dripping with cheese, fries too hot to touch, I watched Julie. She was relaxed. The tension that had defined her posture for the last week was gone. She dipped a fry in ketchup and looked at me thoughtfully. "Grandpa," she said, chewing, "what happened to the guys, the ones you told me about, Henderson?" I paused, my burger halfway to my mouth. The question hit me, but it didn't sting like it usually would. "Henderson made it back," I said. "He opened a hardware store in Ohio, died a few years back, heart attack." "And the others?" "Some made it, some didn't." I took a sip of coffee. "That's the way of it, but we remember them. That's the job of the living, to remember the ones who aren't." She nodded slowly. "I think I want to write it down, not for school, just so we have it, so Mom knows too." I looked out the window at the passing traffic. Telling the story once was hard. Writing it down seemed monumental. But then I looked back at her. She was offering to carry the weight with me. She was offering to help me unpack the boxes in the back of my mind that I'd taped shut. "We can do that," I said. "One story at a time, no rush." "No rush," she agreed. When we got back to the house, the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. I parked the truck and we walked up the drive. I stopped at the mailbox, grabbing the bundle of bills and flyers. The mundane tasks of life continued. The electric bill needed paying, the gutter on the east side was sagging, the grass would need cutting by Sunday. But as I unlocked the front door and stepped into the cool hallway, the house felt different. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It wasn't a museum of my past life. It was a home. Julie kicked off her shoes and headed for the stairs. "I'm gonna change and then start my homework. Thanks for coming today, Grandpa, really." "Anytime, kid," I said. "Hey." She stopped on the third step and turned back. "I'm proud of you," I said. The words felt clumsy in my mouth, but they needed to be said. It took guts to stand up there. She smiled, and it was the smile of the little girl I used to push on the swing set, mixed with the young woman she was becoming. I had a good example. She ran up the stairs, her footsteps thumping on the floorboards. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house. The refrigerator hummed, a floorboard settled, outside a dog barked. I walked into the living room and placed the velvet box on the mantel, right next to the framed photo of Julie's grandmother. I didn't hide it, I didn't lock it away. I left it there, a part of the room, a part of the life we were living right now. I sat down in my recliner and leaned back, closing my eyes. The fatigue was there deep in my bones, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind you feel after a day of honest work. I wasn't guarding the perimeter anymore. The enemy wasn't at the gate. The breach had been sealed, not with barbed wire and claymores, but with words and forgiveness. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of the old house, lemon polish, old paper, and the lingering aroma of the coffee we'd shared. "At ease, soldier," I whispered to the empty room. "At ease." And for the first time in 40 years, I truly was.